Hello, friends. John here again with the Paddles Up experiment. This will be day 2. So what is the Paddles Up experiment? Watch day 1. Basically, you're going to watch me go through this transformational process as well as everyone else. You'll just be hearing and seeing my perspective on my journey of what it means to drop down 18 inches and live more from the heart-centered space rather than the egoic head space. And there's a lot of talk about this online right now. Thankfully, it's coming out more and more about the difference between the two. Heart-centeredness and egoic activity. You've got the head and the heart, or if you want to call it this, the ego versus spirit. One is called to serve the other. And that's the mind, that's the brain, that's the ego-central area of our lives, is to be a servant to the heart. The heart is always meant to lead. That's how it's been from the foundation of this earth, this world of humanity. And if you don't believe that, just look at where your ego has gotten you to this point. Has it been filled with hard work, sweat, and toil? Have you been conditioned to believe that everything that you get or work for is supposed to be hard, and work long hours and strive for it? Well, that may seem honorable and noble to be a hard worker, to be somebody that works 2 and 3 jobs, and then we tell somebody that, and then really what's going on is the ego's looking for sympathy. But the individual in their heart is going, I don't like this. I can't stand this. That I wasn't meant to work all the time, doing something especially that's out of alignment with what I know to be my true north. And I just have to tell everybody, because they think, oh, look at you. You're such a hard worker, working, 18-hour days. Oh, you poor thing. But, it takes a lot of hard work, sweat, and toil to make it in this world, because, after all, we have to survive. So paddles up is simply the opposite. It's throwing our paddles up in the air and saying, I'm going to let the current of heart-centeredness take me wherever the current goes. It was interesting today. Amy and I were having this discussion about the current, and think about it in the natural. A river's current or an ocean's current is natural. It's a natural state of being. It's a natural way of life for bodies of water to have a current flow, a flow of current. And that current is filled with life normally, because, when everything's stagnant, when it gets stagnated, then there is hardly any life. It's a stagnant pond of a cesspool of little tadpoles and crawdads. There is a little life, but not like a flowing river, not like rivers or a ocean's current. There's plant life, there is plankton, there is food, there is abundance. And so the natural state of the flow is where the heart speaks from. It speaks flow, it speaks natural current. And Amy was saying earlier that where that flow is, it's a natural thing to go with it, instead of against it. And we're taught, we're conditioned, we're trained to move against or go upstream and paddle hard in order to get somewhere, get upstream to a mountaintop or a higher place where we're, climbing the corporate ladder, climbing the success pyramid scheme. That's what it winds up being. And it's just flat worn us out in humanity. All over the world you can see this, where they're pressuring people and corporations to cross-train until their brains fall out. And we're seeing this happen to the point to where families are just disintegrating because of work, this thing called WORK, Well, can I just tell you that there's a higher way? It's called creative flow. When we're in the flow of a heart-centered space, when we begin to live 18 inches down, when we begin to cultivate this heart-centered space where our spirit is, then there's an ease, there's an oil of ease, there's an effortless flow to it. So it calls for surrender, surrendering and dropping down, not going higher, but going lower, dropping down. If we want to go higher, it's going hearing. Somebody once said, go hearing instead of going higher, go hearing. Listening requires staying in that surrendered space so that we can drop into this full area of where effortlessness resides. And that's where the Spirit does it for us. That's where God does it for us. And so I'm in this experiment to see what this looks like in my own life. Amy is as well. But I'm just happening to do this on video to live my life out loud, to say, okay, this is what happened today. That's what Paddles Up Experiment is really about in a nutshell. So this space today was interesting because, you know, it starts out great. If you have this in your mind, like last night was powerful because I just really got this concept of surrendering fully, not just halfway, or surrendering because I think it's a sacrifice, and then God sees that sacrifice and says, okay, oh, you're sacrificing for me, so I'm going to go ahead and give you that thing that you're still holding on to or believing for. And so, yeah, you're sacrificing, and so that you can get that item or that product or that material thing or that person or whatever, that opportunity. And it's still agenda. It's still egoic agenda. Ego's still wrapped up in that. But when we fully surrender and we say, okay, God, what do you want? You know, what do you fully want? What do you want in every situation of my life? Because you know best. Where is the current taking me? Where, in other words, not even that question. Where do I release and surrender into that current? And then from that point on, I just enjoy the ride. And whatever comes into my world is God's will. You know, because remember, in the current is life. It's in the egoic efforts and sweating and forcing and pushing is where we get into that troubled spot of saying, okay, here comes the negative sowing and reaping or karmatic thing, right? It begins to roll back on us because that's what ego does. It begins to birth forth these negative energetic things that start coming back towards us, the law of sowing and reaping. But when we're in the current and we're fully surrendered, then there's a barrier, there's a protection around that. It's not to say that we won't go through anything challenging, but guess who handles it from this point on? God does. The current of the Spirit handles that area of our lives, and all areas when we fully surrender every area of our life. Now, this is a process. It takes time for some of us to surrender every area of our life. Like really surrender. Not just for a moment, not just for a day, not just for an hour, but like our entire life. My life is in your hands, God, and we mean it. That's when amazing things begin to show up. On time, God's time. And what we learned today was the timing of things, the impatience. Okay, we're made of patience. Our spirit is always patient. It's the soulish egoic realm that gets impatient. But our spirit is eternal. It has no time grid, and it lives in the eternal now. So it's not like it's bound by linear time like we are. And so it's always exuding the fruit of the Spirit. It's exuding love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, self-control, gentleness, all of those things, long suffering, all of those things wrapped up in it. It's always emanating. It's always resonant with Spirit inside of us. That's what we're made of. We're made of that stuff. And because we're made of unconditional love, the fruit of the Spirit, all of those wonderful, juicy, wonderful things, then the reason I get impatient is I'm looking in the outward, I'm looking in the circumstances, I'm looking outside of myself going, oh, why isn't that showing up yet? Why isn't that new house or that new car or that person, that opportunity or whatever it is what you're believing for? Why isn't that showing up when I want it to? See, that's ego speaking. That's not the real you. The real you would say, hey, I'm surrendered into the current of life and God's got this. Whenever it works out, whenever it happens, hey, I'm content living right here in moment by moment, present now reality. It's easier said than done, my friends, for some of us. I'm just talking about me, my journey. I have no problem surrendering certain areas, but then other areas I'm like, okay, I have to ask myself, do I trust God in that area? And or if I felt hurt or wounded or traumatized from the past, because after all, he didn't come through for me when I thought he would, because I had this preconceived idea or this perception or this false expectation that said he has to come through this way, a certain time. Otherwise, the payment's late kind of thing, right? And how could that be God? How could that be God that things are late and integrity and all that kind of stuff? But actually, if it was birthed in ego and it was gotten from ego, is there an obligation to pay it on time? I don't know. God's mercy can do that. But when it's birthed in spirit, when it's sustained by spirit, when it's in the flow and we're in the current, riding that inner tube of life, just in a surrendered state, guess what? It's paid on time. That's just how the spirit operates. And so, and often there's no interest rate attached to it. Often, no, all the time. So it's kind of like the person that says, God gave me this house. Okay, great. Do you have a mortgage payment? Well, yeah, it's $2,500 a month, but God gave me this house. I got favor. God gave me this house. Well, if we're honest, God didn't give you that house. Because if he gave you that house, there would be no mortgage payment attached, right? No, he gave you favor to get into that house, possibly, and, maybe give you favor to pay some payments, but God gave me that house? If we're really honest, no. And so it's kind of like that, right? So it's surrendering to every moment. It's surrendering to the day. It's surrendering to life. It's surrendering to God. It's surrendering to the current. And what I learned today was there's some areas in my life where it's just not there. And, if we're honest, perhaps you could say the same thing. What areas are you not fully surrendered where you're not going to pick it back up? And yeah, you may be tempted now and then to put your hands on it again, but you're done this time. Like you're really done. And when that happens in these little areas or bigger areas or fullness of the areas, then we're like, oh, okay, now patience is kicking in because that's what I'm made of. And it's no longer ego leading the show, wanting it, demanding it now. Then when it shows up, it's like free and clear, no interest, or free and clear. And wow, that's a beautiful relationship. Wow. It's showing up in ways that I never thought possible. Never dreamed this could happen, this opportunity. And this opportunity, I did not have to kick the door down. I didn't have to pay for it. I didn't have to sweat for it. I didn't have to work for it. It just showed up effortlessly. Amazing. See, that, my friends, is paddles up. That is living in the current, living in the flow of the spirit, and then watching as things surround us in the timing of God. And because we're no longer focused on the time, we're not fixed on the outcome. We're not weighing and debating how it's going to work and how it's going to happen and when it's going to come through. No, because you have no reference point anymore of the ego trying to frame it in and saying that it has to be a certain way. Now watch the ego freak out, right? When you begin to surrender more, because the ego is going to say, oh, there's nothing happening. What's going on around me? There's nothing going on. I'm bored. Let's go make it happen over there. Let's climb that mountain over there. Because after all, God helps those who helps themselves to the ice picks up that mountain, pal. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's religion and egoic spirituality right there. And we're discovering across the planet that people are awakening and they're coming out. They're rising above it. They're ascending. They're transcending these egoic states that say you have to really push hard to get something done. Can I just say that there is no such thing as hard work in the kingdom? There's no such thing as hard work in the current and the flow. There's no such thing as sweat and toil. And if you don't believe that, then just experiment with this and watch what shows up. I know it's noble. I know it's an, quote, honorable thing to say that we need to sweat it out and do the hard things, right? Because after all, you got to get up off your backside and do something, you know? When you have movement and you force it and you push it and you begin to jump out there, and then God's going to surround that and move with you and add to you. Now, I will say if that's non-egoic and it's led, then yes. Because we don't just sit around and do nothing. And this is where the beautiful thing is that remember when I said creative flow? The creative flow is just doing things because it feels right. It feels good. It feels joyful. It feels peaceful. It feels fun. When we do it for that reason and that reason alone, then there's a creative juice that happens. And then things begin to surround that magnetic creativity, begin to surround it and come into our lives in these synchronistic moments. And when that happens, you know you're in the state of flow. Happens in sports. It happens in different arenas of life when you're in flow state, right? When things just magnetically, boom, here's a quantum moment. Whoa, where did you come from? Hello, boom, whoa, where did that opportunity just came up and climbed up on top of me, and I did not work a bit for it. I was just in a flow state, being my creative, fun self, and look what showed up. The purchasers show up, the opportunities, the divine relationships and connections, all those things begin to surround us, not in our egoic frame or time frame, but in the Spirit's way of doing things. And that could mean 3 months from now instead of what the ego wants 30 seconds from now, right? Or it could be when we begin to cultivate this and live in this arena of paddles up and flow, then the quantum collapses upon itself, and then we begin to see acceleration come. So it may not be the 3 months, it may be the 30 seconds, but it's not egoic birthed, right? So anyway, just learning those things today. It's interesting. Learning today would be, if I had to look at a phrase, it would be learning to surrender, really surrender other areas of my life. All right. Thanks for listening, and we will see you on day 3.